Hello. This time, let's do something different. I interviewed Maaike Groenewege. That's me trying to get her surname right. You probably know Maaike from all of the things that she's doing. She's a member of Women in Voice. She is one of the co-presenters of the Linguistics Voice Lunch with Brielle Nikolov. She's constantly writing articles, she's sharing, she's really just a brilliant person and a very knowledgeable conversation designer. So, here is Maaike Groenewege, and I hope you enjoy this as much as I enjoyed speaking to her. At Convocat, it's just yourself, right?
It's just me, yes, indeed. Me, myself, and I, and all my imaginary friends.
But maybe like officially we can start here, because what you've just said is so resonant for me, because aren't we in some way designing imaginary friends, like designing the people we would want to talk to put it that way.
Oh yeah, I mean that's for me. I've always been drafting personalities, and I've always been like drawing little characters and making up their backstories. So to actually be able to do that for a living, and of course I have to mind that I don't go overboard, but I do like the that aspect as well. It's yes, we are writing companions. We're designing companions for people that they can turn to and for help and assistance, and in some cases even some support.
Yeah, totally. I think the applications are very broad. It the like conversational technology can be used in so many use cases. And
Yeah.
on that path, like, have you ever found that you maybe went too far with a personality design and felt that it was too detailed for the use case?
Well, to be honest, I actually haven't written or designed that many voice interfaces or conversational interfaces or bots that use that kind of extensive character design that I thought up.
Yeah.
But for instance, I designed parts of the chatbot for Dutch Railways. And I was just starting out. I mean, I haven't been in this field for very long yet. It's a bit over a year.
Well, I'm not sure if many people have.
True, true.
Yeah.
So I guess in that case, I might be called, well, experienced, perhaps. I'm not sure.
Pioneer.
Yeah, and what we did, I worked together with a lovely colleague from the service desk, and he was just so friendly and so knowledgeable that in the backstory for the bot persona, I included a lot of references to his background,
Yeah.
which didn't really become too explicit in the conversation itself, but did more function for me as a conversation designer to envision
Yeah.
the person that I would like this bot to be and include some of the business aspects as well as the more personal ones. So did it shine through? Yes, in the small talk. I did include some questions that were quite personal. However, I do feel that especially when you're in a service environment, should be a bit of a balance between getting people to the answer they need as quick as possible. Sorry,
Mhm.
and the it shouldn't be too obvious. It should be natural. The persona of your bot. Yeah.
Yeah, I get you. I'm wondering about what you just said, that, like getting people to what they want or need is the focus. But then sometimes isn't, if they feel that they're speaking to a consistent persona, doesn't that speed up the process? In the sense that they feel like they're being led in the right direction.
Um. Yes. Yes and no. I mean, I always see things from multiple sides. I'm a bit like a chatbot myself in my head. If you write a proper conversational bot, so one that lets you, really take your own path, then yes, the persona can definitely play a role in guiding your your client or your customer along. And then tone of voice and especially consistency becomes really important. And that's where your persona can help. And especially the vocabulary that you create for your persona. What I usually do is when I think of a persona in my mind, I don't only do the backstory, but I also create a little dictionary of terms that we want to use and we want to use consistently. And usually within a company, there's already some kind of style guide available. But
Yeah.
it's surprising how little information there actually is on the words that we can use. It's very much about visual identity, brand identity. But what do you call a certain type of subscription or a card type that you use a lot? And especially when there's a lot of detail in the problem, then you want to be able to disambiguate in a consistent way. So what I do find that for chatbots, we need a much more detailed vocabulary to make sure that we use the right words in more detailed problem scenarios as well.
Yeah, great, great. I think to have this detail defined before you start designing really helps to focus. And
Definitely.
with talking about sort of style guides and so on, I've worked with a lot of voice artists for brands, and they would often give us a style guide that also said the voice artist, should be, I don't know, bold or dynamic or authoritative, and all of these sorts of words to define how they present the material, how they present their speech. Do you? How far, because I know that it's kind of what I'm trying to lead you towards, because I know that a lot about intonation and paralanguage and so on. So in your designs, how much are you considering this?
Yeah, I was still in my chatbot mode actually. Sorry for that.
No, totally fine. It's relevant.
Because, of course, yes, voice has got all kind of non-verbal ways of communicating the things that you mentioned, of communicating personality and also the stance and the position of a speaker. And that can, I mean, if I'm speaking in really clipped short sentences with a declining intonation, if I go down in my tone, I sound possibly a bit more authoritative than when I speak really high.
Yeah.
So and it's really interesting because yes, for voice I definitely try to model within the constraints of Google Assistant, which is what I work with. I try to model some kind of personality, but because we only get the standard voices in Dutch on Google Assistant, I do find that it still very much is a matter of word choice. So punctuation can play a role. So it still comes down to the question actually, how do you translate these non-verbal aspects of your persona to words? And I do find that even sometimes things like rhythm in your sentence can make a difference. Because in Dutch, the Google Assistant will actually change the intonation when you change the word order in your sentence. So it pays to play along with, what happens if I put the most important information first? What happens if I put it last? Does it get the accent right? So that's a whole different kind of job I have to do as well.
Yeah, and you're aiming for naturalness, or what is most present in your mind as you refine it?
What I do like to get right at all times is just basic pronunciation of Dutch words. Because sometimes they are a bit of a mess. The second thing, now that I think of it, is that I make sure that intonation-wise, the accent of the sentence falls on the most important part of the message. So it's a bit complicated. But if you look at the intonation patterns in Google Assistant, they follow a fixed path. There's not that much you can do. You can change it a bit by ending your sentence with a question mark. You can change it a bit by putting periods and making shorter sentences. Then the intonation will be changed slightly. But overall, there's a fixed intonation pattern with usually 2 accents in one sentence. And if your most important words are not in those slots, then it will sound slightly off.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of figuring out how to build my sentences in such a way that they still make sense from a rhetorical point of view, like are they coherent and cohesive, but
Mhm.
also from a more phonetic point of view, are they in the right slots for accents or not?
Yeah, this is a huge thing because, like, I think the fact that you have to consider how to make the pronunciation correct is
Yeah.
already one huge hurdle because if I think of a user and they're interacting with this bot and it doesn't speak to them in a way that sounds like correct pronunciation, then from my experience with films and so on, in those moments, the person is wrenched out of the experience and they're thinking, this is weird, something's not right here. And they're not actually engaged with it, they're analyzing it. So
Yeah.
then to have that in place and then go a step further and try and get the intonation and emphasis correct, it's a huge job, right?
Absolutely, and especially because the possibilities within the default assistant voices are quite limited. There are some companies though that do wonderful stuff with synthetic voices and more custom voices.
Mhm.
And once you get those at your disposal, then it's a whole different game altogether because then you can actually work towards things like emotion in your voice.
Yeah.
And then again, it's the question, how much emotion do you really want? And is the vocal translation of what I feel as an emotion actually the same for everybody?
Hmm.
Because I don't know about you, but where I come from The Hague, and we have a very specific way of talking when we're with, our local people. We tend to talk quite fiercely, and
Okay.
people. My husband, he's from another side of the country, and when he first visited my family, he thought we were fighting all the time. Well, we were just having a good time, and yeah, of course, a nice discussion, but nothing was wrong. But he's from another part of the country.
Yeah.
He interpreted our banter as something really filled with emotion and negative emotion even. He really thought we were having a serious fight.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
So we have to be really kind of careful with generalizing stuff like emotion and assuming that it will be the same for everybody,
Yeah.
especially because we cannot really target local communities yet. And it's
Yeah.
the same for gender, for race, for culture. Yeah.
Absolutely. If I think of any city I've lived in, and I've lived in not so many, but quite a few in Scotland, and now two in the Czech Republic, and to try and even generalize within a city or even the small district or region I live in, it's still such a combination of people and way. It's just a fact that we're so different. So, usually because I'm from Scotland, the Scottish are depicted as, kind of tough, like, like groundskeeper Willie from The Simpsons or something like that. And this is such a stereotype, and it's like it's funny, but it's really not us. It's really not what we're like, as and also, when you talk about the way people talk in The Hague, I've had a similar experience here in the Czech Republic, where sometimes people will talk to me in a way that's like, really, is that how, is that your first interaction with me? You're so, you know tough isn't the word, but kind of authoritarian, and it's like that's not very welcoming. um but that's just the way they do it, like not all of them, of course, but in to generalize, yes, a lot of them do. And it's, yeah, it's like, I feel, the sort of, because a lot of this technology is coming from a programming background where people are trying to refine very complex things down into a simple design. It's like, that's always going to be a conflict, isn't it? That trying to simplify designs for a very complex scenario.
Especially if you consider the richness of natural language and its many forms and shapes. And at the moment, we're not even at the stage where every language is represented
Hmm.
on smart speakers. It's
Yeah.
very much, of course, English oriented, Spanish, Hindi, German and French, yes. But other than that, I mean, how many languages do we have? I think the Indian continent has about 2,000 alone already.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So from a linguistic point of view, it's going to be very interesting. Okay, first of all, how do we get all the languages? Then how do we cater for dialects, for accents, for I mean, even in my country, I think we've got two official languages, and I don't know how many dialects, let alone the accents. And then
Yeah.
we're not even talking about the given that is still here already, that female voices are not recognized as well as male voices. And I
Okay.
know why, because male voices, they're lower pitched, so they probably have more overtones and are easier to recognize and process.
Mhm.
Might be, I'm not quite sure about that,
Me
but
neither.
also the algorithms are mainly designed by male development teams.
Yes.
Same for people of color,
Yeah, yeah,
and of course this goes a bit further than just voice. But it's interesting, but also worrying to see what will happen to our natural language acquisition powers if we start to use smart speakers more and more. Will my language still exist in 50 years if everything around me is English?
yeah. I know how much, like exactly we're developing this technology, like a vast group of people, but of course not perhaps as varied as we would want it. And how will that influence culture?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And of course, as a Scotsman, you'll recognize how difficult it is to actually have Google Assistant or Alexa understand what you're actually saying,
yeah.
because she doesn't understand sounds like "ow" or which is a beautiful sound that we actually share in our languages.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, even for myself, if I hear someone from the north of Scotland, I really have to concentrate to understand them because I'm from the central belt, and
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, it's this is I this is the thing that really excites me, is that developing this technology it shines a light on us, or it puts a mirror to us about how incredibly complex and interesting we are and how varied we are.
Yes. And in that sense, I'm really happy that there's a place again for, people like us, the linguists, the sound specialists, the people that view communication from a human point of view.
Hmm.
And it's so funny because I do find that since I turned to conversation design, I'm actually observing myself while I speak, and I do a lot of
Yeah.
and I'm really happy because Google just announced that they're going to introduce continuous mode. That will leave the mic open for a bit longer. So
Okay.
you don't have to end with a prompt anytime you want the user to take their turn. And stuff like and okay and like,
Yeah.
it would be so cool if we can incorporate those non-lexical, non-verbal cues that make conversation so natural and so human.
Yeah, absolutely. This is how we talk. We don't perfectly enunciate and speak in designed sentences. Like
Yeah.
we're not like film characters who only make mistakes when it develops the plot in the right direction. Um, you know,
True.
um, so yeah, and even the emotion or the laughter or crying, or because crying isn't always a sad thing, and it's these are yeah it's really incredible. So I'd like to ask, regarding Dutch, like how well do you think voice assistants are dealing with Dutch language, and are you having challenges, or is it mostly working in the right direction? Are you satisfied so far?
I must say that well, we only get Google Assistant.
Okay.
Alexa doesn't speak Dutch yet, neither does Bixby. But Google Assistant is actually doing a really nice job on Dutch speech recognition. The only problem that I already kind of just briefly touched is that we do have a lot of um, um, names that are quite difficult to pronounce, and those I kind of have to SSML my way around.
Mhm.
For instance, we have a lot of names that are that have French origins. So we have a famous singer who's called Xander de Buissonnier,
Okay.
and I think that Google Assistant turns it into something like, well, Xander she gets right, but then she says something like Buissonnier. So I have to turn Buissonnier into Buissonnier. I actually made a little SSML tutorial on how to do that.
Yeah.
Um, what I do miss though, because I'm a linguist, I know how to write in phonetic alphabet, in
Mhm.
phonemes.
Yeah.
Google Assistant doesn't support them. So I have to go and make up my own kind of imaginary Dutch words that sound a bit like Xander de Buissonnier.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fun to do, but it's not really very effective. Another thing is that I do find that there are quite a lot of glitches in pronunciation in the Dutch Google Assistant. For instance, there's one example which is really annoying for me personally, because if I enter the response or the text conversation designer in Dutch, Google will always make it plural. So she'll turn it into conversation designers, and I don't know why.
That's weird.
So again, I have to go to SSML, enter an alias and do a sub, and then say, actually, I tried designer, just the singular
Mhm.
doesn't work. In order to get conversation designer pronounced properly in the Dutch Google Assistant, I have to spell it out like DIE, next word, ZAAINER.
Wow. Yeah.
And in Dutch, that would literally be pronounced as designer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just bizarre, isn't it? Like these little workarounds that you have to find.
It
And
is, and especially there was this like a team that built a voice action for the Dutch soccer team. Well, I don't know if you know them. I'm not very much into soccer myself, but the
not so
names
much.
are the names are pretty hard to pronounce. So they had to SSML them all. And well, they had a lot of fun, and they did a really good job.
Mhm.
But it's of course it would be so much nicer if you can just say, and it's not just for Dutch people. I guess the same goes for English people, or people of the English-speaking voice community as well. Like,
Mhm.
hey Google or hey Alexa, can I teach you my name? And
Yeah.
that it will train on recognizing how your name is pronounced, because English people have got the same problem.
Yeah,
It's, yeah,
totally. This
yeah,
is actually that would be so good, wouldn't it? To just be able to record you pronouncing your name as you like it to be pronounced, or
yeah,
as it should be pronounced, and
yeah.
then it trains on that. Yeah, it reminds me
Mm,
there was a girl at school who had the Welsh name Shan, but she didn't pronounce it in the Welsh way. She called herself Cyan. And so it's just as you said it, that jumps into my head. Like, what
yeah,
does Google Assistant or Alexa or any text to speech do with her name? Is she
yes.
constantly annoyed? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so you've got a musical background as well as a linguistic background. Am I right?
Not professionally, but yes, I am very much into music. I started singing as a child, and I played the flute for a while.
Okay.
I love percussion,
Hmm.
classical percussion like timpani, but also Indian percussion. I'm a big fan of Indian classical music.
Cool.
and
Cool.
um, and especially Indian music is really interesting, because in order to play Indian percussion, you actually have to learn a drum language,
Yeah.
which has some of the same rules as human language. Like
Hmm.
in human language, you have some sounds that you can pronounce without using your vocal cords, like p or t or k. And if you add your voice to them, they become b and d and g.
Hmm.
And it's funny because in Dutch or in Indian drum language, you've got the same contrast. You've got ta and ha, and ka and ka. So as a linguist, it's just so lovely to see the parallels in the structures, and actually helped me also in structuring my voice prompts.
Okay, yeah, because I hadn't thought before of this connection with Indian music, but what I'm sort of constantly interested in is that the paralanguage and intonation and so on of voice and emphasis, it is sort of the music of voice, isn't it? Or the
It is, and one very important aspect also is the rhythm,
yeah.
because, in a way, intonation is like you say, it's the music, it's the musical melody of your language,
Hmm.
and it's really surprising that by the melody alone, we are already able to identify which language we're dealing with. So
Yes.
you can actually say your English can be really good on verbs and nouns and get all your inflections right and whatever. But if I speak English with a Dutch accent, you can still hear I'm Dutch, right? And
Yeah.
that's really interesting because I studied English in university, and a big part of my language training was actually sitting in the language lab and practicing intonation. For
Wow.
British standard sentences, there's a three-step intonation pattern. And
Yeah.
as long as you use it, you'll probably sound a bit more British than when you just do like this. And the Dutch people usually use half an octave, so like
Hmm.
four musical notes.
Hmm.
And the British, they use the full octave. So they have a lot more variety and variation in how their language melody sounds.
Yeah. This is so fascinating. It's really to to be able to find commonalities in different cultures, in the musicality of their
Mhm.
everyday conversations. It's such a vast uh, area of study. That's yeah. So and you were focusing on English in when you were in the lab, or
Yeah,
did you go into
yeah.
other languages as well?
No, I focused very specifically on English and also in the difference between British English and Dutch intonation patterns.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that already was more than enough for 4 years of studies.
Yeah, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
and
Yeah.
it's really interesting to see actually that how we write can be so different from how it sounds.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, because in Dutch, when you write a question, you always end with a question mark. So
Yeah.
you indicate that's a question. However, researchers have shown that the sound of questions is very different. In fact, when in Dutch you're asking for something that's more like a question for confirmation, like, hey, did you go out for a run today? You don't end with a high intonation. You actually say, hey, did you go for a run today?
Yeah.
So you're asking a question, but you sound more like a regular sentence, what we call a declarative sentence. And especially in Dutch, we hardly ever end a question with a rising intonation,
Okay.
unless we're really, really, really surprised. Like it's
Yeah.
completely new information, then we go like, really? But other than that, we'll just keep it really kind of nice and kind of flat. And
Yeah.
that's really interesting to realize because in your Google Assistant, when you enter a question mark, your intonation will automatically be rising.
Mm.
So many of the questions in Dutch Google Assistant sound very exaggerated because they're asking for confirmation. You enter a question mark and you sound really, really, really surprised.
Yeah. Yeah. This is so you're often writing questions without the question mark.
Yep,
Yeah. Yeah. It's also, when you speak of English and our, octave, I wonder if for American English, as opposed to British, it's maybe even an octave and a half or so, because they're generally
quite
more
possibly,
emphatic.
yes.
Yeah. If I speak of the
Yeah.
Californian, like, oh, and all of this stuff, which we wouldn't really do in Britain.
It's that, and that's really remarkable, of not remarkable, but I can't find any other word at the moment.
Yeah.
Is that when I started studying English, we had to actually make a choice in which kind of English we wanted to learn because it's a completely different intonation. I had one student in my class. She wanted to learn Australian English. Well, that's a completely different game altogether when it comes to
Yeah.
intonation and also in words and vocabulary, of course. But especially intonation is it varies a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. And was it Terry Pratchett that made you want to do British English?
Actually, I only got to know Terry Pratchett once I started studying because one of my tutors, Rias, I owe him, he introduced me to this fantastic fantasy writer who, well, fantasy writer doesn't do him credit at all.
Oh, he's incredible. There's so much comedy in what
Yeah.
in what he writes as well, and yeah.
Do you know that I actually my first voice action on Google Assistant was a Terry Pratchett quote generator. It's been
Okay.
taken down because my privacy statement didn't comply, so I have to fix it.
Okay.
But I actually wrote it in the shape. There's this one personal organizer in one of the stories with
Mhm.
Commander Vimes, who's one of the main characters in Terry Pratchett's Discworld, and it's called the Disorganizer. And it just does everything that you wouldn't expect from a personal organizer. And it's actually got a little imp inside that will talk to you. So I thought, well, it's really nice if that could be the interface for my voice action. So I crafted a persona in the form of this organizer with a very high voice and a little bingly beep kind of
Yeah,
tune to
cool.
wake it up. Oh, I should activate it again. It would be fun. Yeah.
Yeah, you should. You should. And I think something I would love to ask you is because you're clearly a fan, which I knew, of Terry Pratchett. Have you seen any of the films or
Yes.
heard? Yeah,
All
and
of them.
oh, great. So that's perfect because then I can ask my question. So, of course, you knew the characters well from having read them. I presume mostly you read the book first before you saw the
Yeah.
film. Were you surprised with the way the characters you knew and loved were portrayed and how they spoke?
I was so scared of actually going to watch the films because, of course, Terry Pratchett and Discworld, they're a part of my life. They're not just books. I take their philosophy and I apply it in my daily life because it's just so uh, resonating with who I am and who I want to be. And I've been reading them for like forever.
Uh-huh.
So when my first movie was actually Hogfather, and I was so kind of scared, I didn't want to watch. And then the opening started, and I remember the first sounds and the big turtle floating into space. And from that moment, I was so relieved because I thought if they get that right, they'll get anything right.
Yeah, okay.
And there's some really, really of course, some very kind of high-profile characters in the novels, like Death.
Hmm.
And I think they couldn't have done a better job on basically all the characters, but especially Death. Every fan was, of course, wondering what will Death be like. And
Yeah,
then
that
you
voice.
only start realizing how you picture him in your mind.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then when you see that other people actually have the same image, then I think, wow, what a brilliant job also by Terry Pratchett, because he actually managed to create a character that was so consistent and
Yeah.
so clear that most people had the same image in their head when they thought of it.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. He only speaks in capitals, Death, doesn't he?
he
Yeah.
does. Yeah, small capitals.
Uppercase. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. It's like, you know, if you're reading a book, of course, as you were saying, you form a picture in your mind of what these characters are like. You know, you fill in the detail that the writer doesn't add, which is a really strong aspect of reading a book. That it comes to life in your head, but then as soon as they make a film or some other media, somebody has to decide. You know, let's define that character exactly and find an actor who personifies what we want. So I'm so glad that you weren't disappointed. I have to admit I've not seen the films. I know they made quite a few, but I've read some of his books and I really, yeah, I love it. I love his style. It's that kind of Monty Python-esque humor that he adds in, which I adore. It's, you
Yeah.
know, yeah. So I wonder if you have any horror stories that you know, that you can share that don't land you into hot water regarding, you know, if you had a design where it had the words you'd written had to be expressed in a certain way because it was very important that they were expressed in the right way, and you discovered that the result you were hearing was way off and in fact misleading.
Well, fortunately not, I think. Um, we do, I do encounter a lot of lost in translation and terminology confusion, though, where you think that you actually disambiguated two flows enough to
Hmm.
keep them apart, and then your NLP still thinks, oh, this is actually the response to this intent, while you intended it for another intent. I did have one example though that I didn't create myself, but I made it into my own kind of Easter egg,
Hmm.
because there was one voice action, and I mean it was a really wonderful voice action. It was from our Dutch airport, Schiphol, and it gave you advice on what you could bring in your hand luggage.
Okay.
And so I don't know why, but someone asked, "Can I bring a banana?" And then the response would be, "Sorry, weapons are not allowed in your hand luggage." And I mean, that was just such a piece of kind of inadvertent humor that I really wish they'd left it in. So, as a kind of tribute to that, I always include an intent in my voice actions and chatbots. Can I bring a banana? Nobody knows about it, but if you enter it, you get a nice kind of personalized answer that's right in that context. So, if I write for a train company, I'll probably say something like, "Yeah, sure, you can bring it. Just make sure that you don't leave the skin in the train." And or, "I have lost my banana. Yeah, you can go and retrieve it with lost and found if it's still, in one piece," and stuff like that.
That's
So
super.
that's yeah,
That's your
but yeah,
trademark.
yeah,
Yeah. But it's really fascinating that it came to that conclusion that, to equate a banana with a weapon, because, in popular culture, that is often like the joke of someone putting a banana against somebody
yeah,
else's
like ping.
back and pretending it's a gun. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's a pity they removed it. And that's, I guess, on a final note, don't be afraid sometimes to be a bit more, bold and put in some humor and some character, because people will appreciate it. They'll forgive you for this kind of joke.
Yeah, sure. Exactly, as we speak to each other, we try to lighten things and make it more, give it more personality, because we want to connect. So yeah, I guess our designs should too. So
Yeah,
yeah, thanks, Maaike. Am I pronouncing your name right? Is it Maaike?
you're one of the few who gets it like spot on,
Oh
perfectly right.
wow.
Most people have a great kind of approximation, and that's perfectly fine, and I commend them for that. But your pronunciation it's like I would say it myself. Can you do it once more?
Maaike?
Yeah.
Wow, cool. Yeah, that's that's quite a compliment. Thank you very much.
More than welcome. It's,
So
it's
sorry.
I just wanted to thank you as well for having me, because I kind of I'm not the very kind of structured interview type. I kind of ramble a bit, but I
That's
really
great.
enjoyed talking to you. So thank
Yeah,
you.
I think, the rambling conversations, it's maybe a lot better, because, if it's too structured, then it feels rehearsed. But yeah, it's been wonderful to talk to you, and touch on so many different areas and get your perspective. So the last thing I would like to ask you is, if anybody wants to know more about you, or connect with you, or perhaps hire you for work, where would they go?
I'm most active on LinkedIn,
Mhm.
but my name might perhaps be a bit hard to find because it's Maaike Groenewege. but
I'm not going to try your surname. I'm sorry.
But my website is still only in Dutch because I haven't had time to translate it yet. But it's www.convocat. So that's convo as in conversation and cat as in cat.nl. And mike@convocat.nl is my email address.
Yeah, super. And I should probably add that you have some fantastic Medium articles, which I've been reading as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, it's really great. You're sharing your knowledge a lot, which is. Oh, and you have the Dutch Women in Voice as well.
Yeah, but well, we shouldn't leave that one out, should we? Yeah, I did find the Dutch chapter of Women in Voice about a year ago. We're very active. We have a monthly meetup. You can find us on womeninvoice.org. that's where you can find all the chapters. We're a community for empowering women and minority genders who work in speech and voice technology. The Dutch chapter is really open to men as well because we think it's just also more fun. They also have a lot of knowledge. But we do particularly, target women and minority genders because we're still underrepresented in the voice world. And what we do find is that once new technology starts, women are all over the place, and all of a sudden they're not there anymore. And that's what we want to prevent.
Sure, that's great. It's great.
Yeah,
Yeah. So good work.
thank you.
Yeah.